Thanks, Bill. I envy the people who can talk just off the cuff. I can't do that in English, so allow me to read a little bit. First, I have to say, I'm not just a foreign correspondent living here in Goldman, I'm also the president of the Goldman Group. What I'm about to say does not reflect in any way the views of, necessarily the views of my employers or the Goldman Group. If you now expect me to tell you that the world is in uproar about the current political situation in Australia, I have to disappoint you. For most people overseas, Oz is the land of kangaroos and koalas. Yeah. Beaches and the outback. It is a dream destination for millions of Europeans looking for wide open spaces. What happens here politically is of no consequence to them. Well, that seems to change. It started with Prime Minister Abbott's remark last October that the devastating bushfires in the Blue Mountains did have nothing to do with climate change. Against all the evidence provided by the experts, he then accused the United Nations climate head of, quote, talking through her hat. I was working in the TV studios in Switzerland that day when my colleagues from the newsroom called me in. I had to explain to 1 million viewers in Switzerland that we had a climate skeptic as PM. For me as a journalist, it was a great story. As an Australian citizen, I felt embarrassed. But then there was the World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland in January. Within minutes after the new Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, had opened his mouth for the first time on a world stage, I got the first emails. Who is this guy? To quote one of the nicer ones. Is he serious? People were surprised that Mr. Abbott, in front of world leaders, gave a speech that was more or less a pre-election blurb, clearly geared towards a domestic audience, including his customary attacks on other parties. He included his famous line that Australia was back in business. The world wasn't aware that we had been out of business, having just had 2 decades of steady growth and having just gone through the global financial crisis with flying colours. Australia is an island, not just physically, but also in the heads of many of her people. Australian politicians are no different, maybe even worse. They don't care what the world thinks, because the world doesn't bring them votes, as John Howard's press secretary once told me. In the past, they might have been right. Our image was of little consequence, and even when we were pushing refugee kids at gunpoint from one boat to another, we could eventually gloss over the mess with a picture of a cuddly koala. Sorry that I mention you so often here, but it's great that you're here. But these days, the world is increasingly taking notice of how we behave as global citizens, and it is starting to have consequences. A few months ago, I was in Queensland, researching the effects of coal mining on the community there. I saw the destruction and the impact it had on people firsthand. Tears and a lot of coughing from coal dust. Then I went to Abbott Point, where it had just been decided by the so-called Environment Minister Greg Hunt that the owners could dump millions of tons of dredge sludge in the Barrier Reef. Back in Goulburn, I went and wrote the story for my German newspaper, which is the biggest financial paper in Germany. The timing was, I might say, very good. While the shareholders of one of the largest German banks were sipping coffee in Frankfurt, waiting for the AGM to start, my story, oh look at that, getting wind. My story hit their iPads and Galaxies. It caused uproar. Already under pressure from tourism representatives from Australia who were in the room, the bank decided right there that they would not finance Abbott Point for reason of environmental concerns. And so have other banks since. Australian politicians should take note. The world is watching. You might be able to fool sections of the Australian audience thanks to the Daily Telegraph, The Australian, Ray Hadley, Alan Jones, Andrew Walt, and other pathetic propagandists. But you cannot fool the world. You have to understand that natural assets, like the reef, belong to all humans. You cannot just destroy them because you want your donors to make a quick buck so you can become their advisor once us, the people, have kicked you out of the office. All this is also really bad business. Tourists will not come here anymore when there is no reef to see. Tens of thousands of jobs in tourism and associated industries will go. And that brings me to my final and most important point. What baffles foreign observers, and I include several ambassadors, what baffles them most is the way how this supposedly business-savvy government is deliberately wrecking a major and very successful part of the economy. It has instructed a group of lobbyists and climate change liars, sadly, with the help of our very own Member of Parliament, to destroy the renewable energy industry. This is a decision with potentially disastrous economic consequences, because Australia is sending a signal to the world that we are not in business. There is a real danger that companies and countries will start to shun Australia as an investment destination because of its erratic anti-growth policies. And of course, the government is willingly sending thousands of high-quality jobs overseas, very often country jobs, jobs for us here in Goulburn, your kids' jobs. There will be a day in the not-too-distant future when the world community will look for scapegoats, because someone will have to pay for the destruction caused by climate change, the trillions in costs that will flood companies and governments. Despite this clear danger, and while the rest of the world is getting out of coal, Australia wants to become an even bigger hole in the ground. Let's boil it down to the bare facts. The Australian government has decided that we should continue to build our wealth on what is nothing less than the export of catastrophic climate change to the world. Rest assured, the rest of the world will not take it lying down.